Okay, and yeah, okay. So it's Parshas Bay. Let me just, for anyone who comes later, because I know you have a Chumash, let me just bring up the URL. Okay, and where we want is. Okay. Torah portion. Yeah, and bow. Bow. Okay. Here we are. There we have buddy, and I'm gonna take make a copy. Okay, copy and paste, and we're in business. Okay.
Hello.
Hello, Sylvia. Good to see you.
I always say good to almost see you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I see your phone number. That counts. Okay. Okay. You're a bit crackly, but I can hear you. Hopefully, you can hear me. Now we're going to share, so you're not going to be able to see me while we share a screen. 1 second. Okay. I'm going to share a screen and we'll begin. Okay. Share URL. Paste, share. Okay, so Parsha 1 was up on the screen, and we already had 7 plagues, and we're up to plague number 8. And plague number 8 is the locust, which in many ways, and in terms of its effect, was the most severe. So, Vayomer Hashem Moshe, Hashem said to Moshe, Bo Paro, come to Paro, Kaniach Badati at Libo. I have hardened his heart with Lev Avodav and the heart of his servants. L'manshiti ota ta'ela b'kirbo. That I might place my signs in their midst. In other words, any normal person after 7 plagues would say, uncle, go, leave. But Hashem wants to show his power and his greatness, and therefore he's going to harden his heart. Why is this there? So there are 2 basic answers. Maimonides says that the Egyptians were so evil that their punishment was that their free will is taken away from them so that they continue in the path they chose and will be destroyed. The ultimate punishment for misusing your free will is to have your free will taken away from you. That's number 1. Number 2 is the Sephorno's approach, who says that since, as I mentioned before, any normal person would give up, God hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he shouldn't be affected by the disasters approaching, falling upon his community, but be forced to choose to do the right thing only because it's the right thing. So according to the Sephorno, Pharaoh's heart is hardened in order to force him to choose the right thing just because it's the right thing and not be influenced by the tsaras, by the trouble that he's having. So those are the 2 general approaches to this idea. And the larger purpose is, in order that such spectacular miracles be done, you can tell your child and your children's children, that which I have done to Egypt, or I have mocked Egypt with, and the signs that I put them, and you will know that I am Hashem. In other words, this is the name of God, the 4-letter name of Hashem, which stands above nature. No, not only did I create the world and create a system, but that I stand above nature and I control everything. The reason this is important to know is that a person can therefore never argue that, well, the Torah is nice, but in the real world it doesn't work. Hashem says, I'm Hashem, I made the world, and therefore, and I control the world, therefore there's nothing in the world that is outside my power, whether it is the Torah, which I ask you to obey under all circumstances, or the world itself, where no power can stand before me. So Moshe and Aaron came to Paro and said to him, so says Hashem, the God of the Hebrews. How long will you refuse to, it says here, humble itself. It means to respond, to obey me. Send my people forth that they may serve me. Because otherwise, in this case, if you don't send my people, I will bring locusts into your border. So, mechisa deinaretz, they will cover the appearance of the earth. Below you won't be able to see the earth. There'll be so many, and they'll eat everything left over from the hail, and they'll eat every tree that grows in the field. They will fill your house and the house of all your servants and all of Egypt, which neither your forefathers nor your forefathers' forefathers saw this from the day the world was created to this day. And they left Paro. So what happens, though, didn't wait for Pharaoh's response, they left. And the locusts, in other words, even though many of the other plagues are more spectacular on a supernatural level, here the locusts that can eat up all their food and leave Egypt in a terrible state. Now, locusts are a natural phenomenon, but Moshe was going to have them come exactly when he said and leave exactly when he said, which normally one doesn't control. And it would be a plague of locusts far more intense than they had ever seen before. So in a way, Moshe is now pointing out that even within the order of nature, God can manipulate, not only can God transcend nature, but God can manipulate the natural world in such a way that you demonstrate. That's why this is such a special play. God is demonstrating that the ordinary natural world is completely subservient to his will while it remains the ordinary natural world. And that's why it gets its own portion. And Paro's servants told
Rabbi,
yeah.
Isn't there at one point when God says he will never interfere with the working of the natural world? When did that happen?
I'm sorry?
There's a point where God says he will never again interfere with the natural world.
No, what Hashem said after the flood was, Sylvia, that I will never again interfere in such a way that I destroy the whole world. But he could destroy a country or a species. He's not going to destroy the whole world. God never promised not to interfere. Why? Because the natural world and God are one and the same thing. In other words, nature is not something separate from God. The natural world is simply a description of things that God does on a regular basis. That's why in the prayer, and it's taken from Tehillim, we say, Masha v'ruach u'mered geshem. You cause the wind to blow and the rain to fall. Every breath of wind, every drop of rain, every particle, and every unit of energy in the universe is God. Is God's being expressing itself in that way. So God cannot be involved because everything in the universe is divinity. Everything in the world is an expression of God's presence. But if it happens on a regular basis and we take it for granted, we call it nature. And that's the point of this particular plague. The whole point of this particular plague is to demonstrate that nature and God are not two separate things. Okay? But Yomer Avdi Paro Ela. So the servants of Pharaoh told him, how long will this person be for us a stumbling block? Send the people, let them serve Hashem. Haterim Teda, hey Pharaoh, don't you realize, do you not yet know that Egypt is destroyed? If this keeps up, Egypt will be destroyed. So Vayushav es Moshe v'Aaron, they returned Moshe and Aaron to Paro. Vayomer lehem, he said to them, L'chuv du as Hashem, go serve your God. Mi me'i v'holchem, but who's going? And Moshe says, we'll go with our children and our elders, with our sons and our daughters, with our sheep and our cattle, because it'll be a celebration to Hashem. And he said, no, let God be with you if I let you go and your children. Evil faces you in the desert. Let the men go. And he drove them away from Pharaoh. So Pharaoh says, you don't have to bring your wives and children. Men need to serve God. Not everyone else does. And Moshe says, no. In our religion, everyone serves Hashem. And everyone has to come. And without the, men, women, children, they all serve Hashem. But more to the point, why does God tell Moshe to tell Pharaoh we want to go serve Hashem for 3 days? He's trying to give Pharaoh an out. And originally, before God hardens Pharaoh's heart, God tells Moshe, tell Pharaoh go for 3 days. That way Pharaoh can say, oh, I only let them go for 3 days and they ran away. Oops, they went off to Israel. What can I do? He was giving him a way to save face, a way to acquiesce without being seen as surrendering. God wanted to make it easy for Pharaoh. And instead, at this point, Pharaoh's heart, God is hardening Pharaoh's heart. So Pharaoh says, no, I'm going to keep your kids and wives hostages, which of course defeats the whole purpose. The whole purpose was to give Pharaoh an out, to say, let him say whoops. And in this case, but on a deeper level, to Pharaoh, religion was for priests, for the important men. It wasn't for women and children. And Moshe says, no, our women, our children, even our cattle, everything has to go because we all serve Hashem together. And we're all equal in our relationship to Hashem.
So, Rabbi, at this point, God is telling an untruth.
Namely,
they are going out to serve God.
Well,
because he knows that they're going out to escape.
Well, so if you look at the original text last week, yeah, I'll show you. The language is very, very precise. And again, it's done in order to make it easier for Pharaoh, because he can't, it's hard for him to admit that he has no power. And that he just has to let them go. Yeah, let me show you. One second. It's a little bit slow today. Here. So this is chapter 2, chapter 3, verse 18 in Shemot. And O hearken, you shall come, you and the elders of Israel, you shall say, go to the king of Egypt and say, the Lord, the God of Hebrews, has met us. And now let us go a journey of 3 days in the desert to sacrifice to Hashem. In other words, Hashem tells them to say, we're going 3 days journey, which is the distance to Mount Sinai on a direct line. He's not saying they're going to come back. He lets Pharaoh imagine that they're only going for 3 days. But the actual language is they're going to go 3 days journey into the desert to serve Hashem. They're going to go 3 days and then they'll serve Hashem. It doesn't actually say they're going to come back. But God lets Pharaoh think they're going to come back in order in order that that the Egyptians believe they were going away for a few days, or at least Pharaoh could fool himself and tell his people, "Oh, I let them go for 3 days," then they ran off. That's the basic idea. But what God told Moses to tell Pharaoh wasn't that we're coming back. It's that we're going for a journey of 3 days, and at the end of that 3 days journey, we're going to serve God. He didn't say what would happen next. And the ambiguity is designed to make it easier for Pharaoh to let the people go without admitting that he's powerless.
So I have one more question, Rabbi, and that is, did the people, when they say go 3 days and then serve God, by that time the Israelis or whatever they were called at that point had already lived there for several generations, and would they know what it means to serve God?
So the answer to your question, Sylvia, is the next piece in the study.
Is what?
The very next piece in this parsha is the answer to your question. As always, you asked an excellent question. One moment. I'm just going to put it up. Yeah. So chapter 12. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe el Aaron. Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, "This month shall be for you the first month, and months are counted from Nisan to the year Tishrei. And speak to them. On the 10th of the month, every person shall take a sheep. And if it's a small household, a few will take a sheep. And on the 14th day,
we lost sound, Rabbi.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So Hashem says, take a lamb, slaughter it to my name, roast it, put the blood on the lintel, on the doorpost and the lintel on the outside. What is he saying? The Egyptians venerated the sheep. They worshiped the sheep, like the Indians in the cow. So Hashem says, listen, I want you to take your overlord's prized animal that they worship, and I want you to slaughter it and eat it as an act of worship. In other words, how do you know what it means to worship Hashem? Hashem says, I want you to get rid of all the superstitions and all the fear you have of the Egyptians and their idols and their beliefs. I want you to take their God and kill it in front of their face and eat it in front of their face and put the blood all over your doors. What does it mean to serve Hashem? To completely reject the Egyptian path and enter on a new path. So that's exactly why, in order for the Jews to leave Egypt, they have to be willing to tear themselves away in a public and dangerous way, in a rebellious way from both Egypt, because not only is it the Egyptians they would have to be afraid of, but their own superstitions. They lived among the Egyptians for 210 years. They probably were very scared of herding a sheep. So Hashem says, you know what? I want you to take the bull, or in this case, the sheep by the horns, and I want you to reject all your Egyptian beliefs and all your fear of the Egyptians. From now on, you're my people and you only fear me and you do what I say. And that typically involves doing the exact opposite of what the Egyptians and all the nations around you do. So this is exactly because of this, they were given the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach, the Pesach sacrifice, and the Seder, and so on. They were given this mitzvah precisely for this purpose, that they begin to learn what it means to courageously and unequivocally serve Hashem and unequivocally sever all their ties with idolatry. That's exactly the point, sir. That's why this is the next piece in this part.
Thank you.
And the next thing is, and before that, they're told to circumcise the men because an uncircumcised man can't eat from the sacrifice. So they're also entering Hashem's covenant. And it says after he gave them the commandment, the people bowed v'yishtachavu, verse 27, and they worshipped Hashem. In other words, they acknowledged that they're worshiping Hashem and no one else. And that's what enables them to leave, because God can't take the Jews out of Egypt until they liberate themselves, at least begin the process of liberating themselves from the Egypt within, from their superstitions, from their idolatry, from their fear of the Egyptians, from their mentality as being slaves to being free people. And we see that the plate of the firstborn only happens after the Jews slaughter the Korban Pesach. Only after they sat down to eat the Korban Pesach, to that very first Seder, after they showed this courage, after they divorced themselves from the Egyptian way, that's the moment that God smites the firstborn of the Egyptians. So the connection is very fundamental. Now, there's this famous pasuk here, Moshe b'nei Yisrael, the time the Jews lived in Egypt is 430 years. But of course, if you add up all the genealogy years from earlier, from last week's parsha, it doesn't add up to 400 years, and there's a lot of overlap. Really, they were only there for 210 if you do the calculation. But, so why do we say 430? Because from when God told Abraham that his children would be slaves in a land not theirs, from that moment when the Jewish people were always wandering, they never actually had their own land, right? Avraham Yitzchak lived in the land of Canaan, in someone else's land. So from the moment of the decree until the moment they left Egypt was 430 years. They were in some way subordinate in someone else's land all that time. So the actual severe the bondage was only 210 years, and the actual severe bondage began when Miriam was born, so it was only 86 years. But we mentioned this to say that from the moment Abraham was told that his children would be slaves in Egypt, in a land not theirs, all those 430 years are part of this wandering until such time as the Jewish people leave Egypt as a people. Because this is the moment where they're born as an Am, as a nation, and in particular as a divine nation. That's why, it ends with the giving of the Torah, but it begins with the first mitzvot, which are here. Now, there's one important note. It says here that you should redeem the firstborn, but in reality, the firstborn became the Levium, the Levites, until the sin of the golden calf, when the job was given to the Levites. But the whole Torah was written down. Actually, today is the day Moshe started saying the book of Devarim. And during the 37 days Moshe said the book of Devarim, he also wrote the whole Torah down. So even things in Bereshit and Shemot were written by Moshe from Moshe's perspective. So when it talks here about redeeming the firstborn, Hashem dictated it to Moshe here. But it wasn't in the original plan, in the original story. When they left Egypt, the firstborn were still the Levites and priests. But since the Torah was written down at the end of the time in the desert, Hashem has Moshe insert here the law as it would be after the giving of the Torah. After the episode with the golden calf and so on. Because the Torah is written from the perspective of Moshe right before his death in the 40th year in the desert. And that answers a great many questions that people have about things that are stuck into parts of the Torah, in essence, relating to matters that had not yet been decreed or not yet happened. The answer is that even a story of Yaakov, right, is written by Moshe in the 40th year in the desert. Okay, one more piece. And here is the mitzvah of sanctifying the firstborn, and also the law of Pesach and the law of Tefillin. Now, some say because the last two parts of the Tefillin are in Devarim, they weren't given yet. So some say that in the desert the Jews put on Tefillin, but with only two parshiot, with two empty boxes. The other interpretation is that the verse begins when you will come to the land. The next time tefillin are mentioned, it says when you will come to the land, and it mentions them again. So some say that the obligation of tefillin only devolved upon the Jews when they entered the land of Israel. The other opinion says the obligation began at that time in the desert, but they had to in the head tefillin, which we know from here are supposed to have four sections. Two of those compartments would be empty. But at any rate, the mitzvah of redeeming the firstborn and giving the firstborn cattle and sheep to Hashem are all here, as well as the mitzvah of tefillin.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
When Yaakov learned, for how long was it, 14 years or 20 years?
Yeah.
So what was he learning then? The whole Torah was he learning Torah, or what exactly?
Well, yeah, so I mean, exactly what form the Torah took, we don't know, but certainly the ideas of mitzvot of the Torah existed. Maybe the events, the written, in other words, it would have been more things from the oral Torah than the written Torah. It would be basically the future mitzvot and also ideas of what today we call Kabbalah, about the nature of Hashem and so on. And obviously all the things that are relevant to the Noahide laws.
Is it a midrash that he went to a yeshiva?
Yeah, it's a medrash. In other words, where was he those 14 years? There's a whole midrashic theme about Shem and his son Aver passing along the Torah, which means whatever divine teachings passed down from Adam to Sheth, to Mr. Shelach, and then to Noah. So there was a tradition. It's the exact nature of that tradition, I don't know. But it is a medrash. It is a medrash, but it it answers why there's missing years in Jacob's life and so on. It's what I call historical medrash. In other words, a tradition, historical tradition handed down over time. Okay, everyone. I hope you have a most wonderful day. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Rabbi. For a wonderful, for a lovely,
All the
lovely
best.
service.